Is there any questions? Please raise up your hands. And online participants, you can turn on your microphone to speak or leave a message in the group chat. Okay. Seems no question. If you would like to have a further discussion on this topic, I'm sure that you can email Professor after the conference. Thank you for the. Okay, now let's welcome the second keynote speaker, Associate Professor Paul C. Mocombe from West Virginia State University, United States, to make the keynote speech. The speech title is The Social Class Language Game. Welcome.
I want to thank you for having me this evening. Today is actually my birthday, so it's Friday on this end. My wife helped me put on the PowerPoint presentation. So bear with me. This technology is new to me, using the PowerPoint, so bear with me. Once again, I thank you for having me, and I'll do my best to present my talk. So here we go as I share this screen. PowerPoint. Okay, can everyone see the screen?
Yes, we can see.
Okay. So the title of my talk is Social Class Language Game. So the theory of phenomenological structuralism is a theory that I developed in grad school about almost 20 years ago now, which is a structurationist theory. Structurationism is a theory developed by Anthony Giddens of the UK in the 1980s, and it was an attempt to resolve what is known in the social sciences as the structure agency debate in the social sciences, which is tantamount to the free will determinism argument that we find in philosophy. However, in sociology, the issue arises as a result of the linguistic turn and social science analysis. Prior to the early 20th century, the focus was always on biology in terms of trying to explain the nature of human action in the world. Then we get to about the early 20th century, mid 20th century, you start to the focus becomes on linguistic system or the systemicity of language as the basis of human social action. And this would also be adopted in the social sciences by either focusing on social structure arises that to what extent is the determining factor of our actions a result of the social structure or the rules of the social structure, but to what extent are they a result of actions arising from the human being as a rational actor who makes decision or acts based on rational action. So the school structurationist theory would be dominated by predominantly four theorists. These four theorists are Anthony Giddens, Jürgen Habermas, the late Jürgen Habermas, uh, Marshall Solins in anthropology, and and Pierre Bourdieu in sociology as well. both four theorists, European theorists, would dominate the field of structurationist sociology. In grad school, I took on because for me, their idea and what structurationism argues is that human actions are a result of our internalization of the rules of the social structure, which we recursively reorganize and reproduce in our social action. So therefore, the rules of conduct that are sanctioned by the social structure are internalized by human beings, and we human beings recursively reorganize and reproduce these rules in our everyday social actions, in our everyday actions in the world. But the problem for me is that the internalization of the social structural rules in our everyday action does not explain human action. All it does is it explains what's called structural differentiation. It explains how one human behavior may be differ from another human behavior based on the rules of conduct which are sanctioned. So therefore, there's really no agency in that. We're reproducing the rules of conduct of the social structure, and where we find differences of behavior, those differences of behavior are a result of structural differentiation. Now, this is high theory, and many of you are sitting in the room and asking, well, why is this relevant in our everyday lives? This issue of structure and agency is relevant because the human being is facing climate change. The human being is facing social conditions contemporarily that not only threatens our ecosystem, but it also threatens our social environment. And we're facing cataclysmic issues now, which are related to how we reproduce our lives in the world. And how we produce our lives in the world are basically determined by our relations to capital contemporarily. And this relations to capital threatens our ecosystem and our social environment. So to resolve the problematics associated with the capitalist relations of production, it is key to understand the origins of our social actions and how we can go about changing those social actions so therefore we can establish a more better ecosystem or better relationship with the ecosystem. So this issue of structure agency is very important. And for me, structurationism does not resolve the issue of structure and agency or social structure and social change, which is important for us to move forward contemporarily as our relations to capital threatens our ecosystem. Now, more concretely speaking, I apply this theory to the origins of Black consciousness, and I applied this theory to the origins of Haitian consciousness in the world as well. Because as I was developing the theory, one of the issues that I could not, that baffled me was the fact that how is it that people of African descent in America, in the diaspora, being Haiti, would turn around as people who experience slavery, oppression, exploitation, and would turn around and reproduce that same exploitation, that same form of oppression around the world. And at the time when I was writing this, President Barack Obama was the president of the United States. And one of the issues that I had is that Obama, as an educated Black man, was reproducing the very system that oppressed communities of color, in his case, Black people, in the form of what they did to Gaddafi, what it was done in Africa, his push American hegemony in Africa, his push of American hegemony in Haiti, his push for American hegemony in Cuba. And lately, we're seeing the same process with people of color, such as Kamala Harris, Lloyd Austin, and many other people, persons of African descent, who are serving in the American administration but are in turn reproducing the same hegemonic and exploitative forces that once exploited them. So the issue became for me, how do we resolve this issue? What is the cause of Black people being indoctrinated to themselves become colonizers? Today, contemporarily, we have people like Lloyd Austin who is supporting the Nazi regime like Ukraine. Contemporarily, we have Lloyd Austin who is providing arms to Israel to kill Palestinian men, to slaughter Palestinian men and children. What explains that? If there was agency, you would think Lloyd Austin, Kamala Harris, Barack Obama will be self-reflective, rational individual who would weigh the experience of their own community vis-a-vis the experiences of other people of color. But that's not what we're seeing. What we're witnessing is that contemporarily Black people basically have become the bearers of ideological domination for American hegemony and American imperialism. And it is within this context that I try to understand the structure agency debate that dominated the social sciences. So my theory of phenomenological structuralism basically embodies three major theories. The first one is what I call consciousness field theory. The second one is a social class language game. And the third one is what I call anti-human psychology, which for me is the type of human psychology that we should implement in order to resolve the current crisis that we as humanity is facing. So for me, the product of social action in the world, the source of social action in the world is of four origins. It is the mental stance, and by mental stance, I adopted to develop the theory of phenomenological structuralism. I adopted from Martin Heidegger what he calls the analytics of design. And he uses three terms. He uses what's called present at hand, ready to hand, and unready to hand to understand how we as human beings encounter the objects of the world in our consciousness. He argues that we either encounter them present at hand, meaning that ready to hand, we encounter them ready to hand, meaning that we simply adopt, or the concepts of consciousness, we adopt them without thinking about it. We do as we do without thinking about it. We do as they do without thinking about it. He calls that position, that mental stance, ready to hand. His second term is unready to hand. Unready to hand is when something goes wrong and we have to reflect on the objects of consciousness because in some instances there's a problem has arisen. He calls that position the unready to hand, where we have to think about an object or something of our consciousness because something has gone wrong. The present at hand for Heidegger is the scientific position. It is also the position of religiosity. This is the position from which we develop rules of conduct. This is the position where we develop ideologies. And so for me, the social actions of individuals stem from those three vantage points in relations to four structure and structures. Now, this is very important because in America and in Western Europe, postmodernism and post-structuralism has dominated the academic literature. It has dominated the academy. And all postmodernism and post-structuralism attempt to decenter the human subject. They dismiss rationality. They dismiss the ability of language in a language to be objective and capture objective reality. In essence, the human being in postmodern thought and post-structural thought is a floating signifier. And that's reflected in social interaction in America and Western Europe through the process of identity politics. Through the process of identity politics, the individual is no longer male, female, black, white. You are what you feel like being at any given moment, at any given time in the world, because you're a floating signifier. If I wake up tomorrow and I want to be a woman, I can be a woman. So therefore, the human being is decentered. But for me, postmodern and post-structural thought is an analytic of design. It's an aspect of of how we perceive the world. It is not the mode by which we perceive the world. It's not the only mode by which we perceive the world. Martin Heidegger introduces, for me, what I consider the three modes by which we experience objects of consciousness and objects in the material world. So in my theory of phenomenological structuralism, our social actions are a result of our mental stance vis-a-vis for structuring structures. So I dismiss the notion that the postmodern post-structural notion that the human being is a floating signifier. I dismiss that altogether and argue that no, the human being is a structure that is determined by four structures. The first structure is what I call phenomenal properties. And to develop this structuring element of human nature, I developed the theory of consciousness field theory, which I try to connect the ontological origins of consciousness to the physics of consciousness. And to do that, what I argue is that there's two vantage points or two views regarding the origins of consciousness in the world. One is called the materialist perspective. And what the materialist perspective argues is that the ontological origins of consciousness are connected to the neural correlates of consciousness. By that means the structure of the brain, basically the functional structures of the brain and its neuronal activities determine consciousness. There are aspects of the cerebral cortex that determines the consciousness of the individual. And once the individual dies, consciousness is also extinguished. The second concept is called the post-materialist perspective. And post-materialists argue that the brain does not determine consciousness, so therefore the neural correlates act on consciousness. And from that perspective, the brain facilitates consciousness. So consciousness stems from outside of the brain, but it is embodied and it becomes facilitated by the brain through the neural activities of the brain. And who made it famous? Roger Penrose, Stuart Hameroff have made that perspective famous by arguing that consciousness are quantum computations that take place in the microtubules of neurons in the brain. For my theory, I adopt a post-materialist perspective on consciousness. So what I argue ontologically, the brain facilitates consciousness, and I argue that consciousness is the fifth force of nature. So that's the first structure of our human behavior, because the metaphysical implications of my theory is that consciousness is reincarnated. It's more so an Eastern conception of consciousness than it is a Western conception of consciousness. So I argue that the phenomenal qualities of our past experiences all serve to structure our actions in our contemporary dispensation of space-time. And I won't go into the physics of it all, but if you read my work, you can go along. So that's the first origin. So the first origins of our human action is what I call consciousness field theory, the phenomenal properties or qualia of past actions of our existence. The second origins of our actions in the material world, I argue, is our mental stance vis-a-vis the anatomy and physiology of the body. These are the unconscious drives that structure our behavior, our drive for thirst, hunger, etc. Those are one of the origins of our actions in the material world as well. The third origins of human action in the world is what I call structural reproduction and differentiation. And this is the part that structurationists such as Anthony Giddens, they build on. They build on structural reproduction and differentiation, which is related to the social relations of production as the origins of consciousness, as the origins of our human actions in the world. So for me, structurationists just focus on this aspect of human action, but they omit the first two that I mentioned. So the focus is on our relationship, our relations to the mode of production, as well as the means of production, and our internalization of the rules of conduct and how those rules of conduct differentiates us in material reality to give us our social actions, to make us act in the material world. And the fourth origins of action for me is actions which arrive from what the postmodern and post-structuralists call the deferment of meaning and ego-centered communicative discourse. That's from Jacques Derrida, who argues that the old structuralists used to focus on the relationship between signifier and signified, but postmodernism, the signifier and the relationship is always between signifier and signified, signifier and signifier, because we can defer meaning and ego-centered communicative discourse. So to understand social action in my theory of phenomenological structuralism, we must now combine our mental stance, which I adopt from Heidegger, to the four structuring structures: qualia, the drives of the body, structural reproduction and differentiation, as well as our ability to defer meaning and ego-centered communicative discourse. But what I argue is that in the end, the structurationists are correct in the sense that in the end, structural reproduction and differentiation is the determining factor of our social action in the material world because of the power and power relations that exist with or that results from the constitution of society through what I call five systems. So for me, social structure, another word for social structure is social class language game, and the social structure and the social class language game are constituted by five systems. These five systems are language, communicative discourse, ideology, ideological apparatuses, and the mode of production. These are the determining factor that determine our social action in material reality. So in the end, it is the power relations that emerge from the social class language game, which is constituted by five systems that determine the social actions that we recursively reorganize and reproduce in the world. And the social class language game, for me, emerges within two modes of production, either the capitalist relations of production or what I call, which Weber calls the Protestant, which Weber argues stems from the Protestant ethic and the spirit of capitalism. And the other is the communist mode of production, which I call in my book, the voodoo ethic and the spirit of communism. So what I argue is that those two modes of production have dominated all human societies, and social class language games emerge within those two modes of production. And then you do have social class communities that emerge within these two modes of production, but their emergence are a result of structural reproduction and differentiation. So therefore, Black people in America, the reason why Obama is able to reproduce the imperial imperative of a racist, classist system that we found in America is because he was indoctrinated by the language, the ideology, the ideological apparatus, the communicative discourse, and the mode of production of the American capitalist system. So therefore, he's differentiated in terms of his class position, but not in terms of his base position. He simply recursively reorganized and reproduced the imperial imperatives of the society because the society interpolated and embourgeoised Obama. There's only, for me, 3 instances where there was an attempt to synthesize the two mode of production, which I argue have dominated all society. The first, for me, was the Haitian Revolution. Jean-Jacques Dessalines attempted to synthesize those two systems post the Haitian Revolution, which ended in 1804. Then you have the Americans in the during the Great Depression. Great Depression attempted to synthesize those two modes of production through the New Deal. And thirdly, I believe the socialism with Chinese characteristics is also an attempt to synthesize those two modes of production. Now, does that mean the synthesis of those two modes of production represent a change that will ultimately lead us out of the quagmire we're facing in relations to what American capitalist relation and imperial desires have caused in the world? That we have to wait to see. But is the current trend being pushed by Russia an alternative to what we're facing? That I'm starting to theorize about now contemporarily. So I really don't know one way or the other. But I'll conclude by saying this. So for me, this theory is important because it helps us understand the nature and origins of our consciousness, one. Second, the nature and origins of social change. Two, the third is what type of society should we as a species constitute in the material world to offset the impending doom we're facing through American imperialism, through capitalist relations of production, which threatens the environment, which is exploiting masses of people around the world, which threatens human life, which is dragging us into imperial wars throughout the world. So this, for me, is the importance of my theory, and I will end with that. Thank you all for having me once again.
Thank you, Professor. Now is our question and answer part. Is there any questions? Okay, we are so impressed by that. Thank you. Now, everyone, please move to here. Let's take a group photo together. And online attendees, please turn on the camera. We'll take a screenshot for you too. And then we will have a tea break. Please come back and return to your seats before 10:20. And everyone, please stand here. Let's take a group photo together. Thank you.
It says, open my camera.
Please turn on the camera. We will take a group photo. Okay, our group photo is completed. Thank you for your cooperation. Next is the break time. See you later. Thank you.